by the National Pi Sigma Alpha organization. I'm Zoe Oxley. I'm a professor of political science at Union College in upstate New York, and I'm currently the president of Pi Sigma Alpha. This is actually a very exciting time for Pi Sigma Alpha. We're celebrating our centennial this year. It was in October of 1920 that the first Pi Sigma Alpha chapter was chartered at the University of Texas. And actually tonight's event is part of our centennial series. It's one of the many ways that we are acknowledging Pi Sigma Alpha's 100th birthday. The series grew out of our reality due to COVID. We can't gather in person on our campuses, as you all know. And probably too much of our campus lives are spent virtually now, which is certainly not ideal. On the other hand, though, we can broadcast events such as this that would normally have been conducted on campus. This is one of the positive outcomes of COVID, and I expect it to persist once the pandemic is over. Shortly, coming up, we have more events, part of our Centennial series, Pi Sigma Alpha does this fall, and plans are underway to offer even more live talks and presentations throughout the entire academic year, so do be on the lookout for information about those. Tonight, as you know, the focus will be on how undergraduate students can prepare for law school and for a career in the law. Dr. Jeanine Kraybill will begin with some brief introductory remarks, and then she's going to introduce a few law students, as well as a recent graduate of law school, to share their observations about how they prepared for law school and how to be successful once arriving in law school. There will be plenty of time at the end for questions from all of you. Jeanine Kraybill is an assistant professor of political science, as well as the director of the pre-law program at California State University, Bakersfield, where she also serves as faculty advisor for the Psi chapter of Pi Sigma Alpha. Dr. Kraybill's research and teaching stretch across political rhetoric, judicial politics, and religion. Her interest in female religious leadership and issues of gender and justice resulted in her latest book, One Faith, Two Authorities: Tension Between Female Religious and Male Clergy in the American Catholic Church. The book was published last year by Temple University Press. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Kraybill for what is sure to be an interesting and enlightening session on preparing for law school. Thanks for attending.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Oxley. I'm very excited to be with you today. My name is Jeanine Kraybill, and as I was introduced, I have the privilege of directing our pre-law program at CSUB, and I have some former alumni of that program that are really good examples of how to get in law school and how to be successful in law school and navigate the admissions process. What we're going to do tonight is I'm actually going to be kind of asking them some questions, because instead of, going over formally the nuts and the bolts, which is important, I think we could do that through a light conversation, which may be more meaningful for you. It wouldn't be a virtual event without my puppy Miles in the background. So forgive me. He's thinking about applying to law school too. Some things I will say, because I deal with many students when they're thinking about going to law school, is I think one of the best ways that you can discern that vocation is by trying to get yourself engaged in your local legal community. And how do you do that? Well, you should find out on campus if you have a pre-law advisor. That faculty member it's their job, their point of contact with you to discuss the application process, to discuss what it means to go to law school. And many times, sometimes your pre-law advisors will be engaged in the legal community to some degree, and they might be able to help facilitate job shadowing, taking you to court, seeing what kind of classes are offered where you can have access to members of the legal community. One thing I have noticed as a product of our pre-law program at CSUB is I think that our students have a bit of an edge when they go to law school, because they have been so exposed to the legal community. They have kind of a little bit of a better sense of what they're getting into. And through multiple conversations with members of the legal community, they've been able to kind of discern their vocation, which is leading me to this next component, which is thinking about why you want to go to law school. Some people, they want to be an advocate, right, for people who are disenfranchised. I have a colleague of mine, Jen Fair, that's interested in public interest work, for example. And so thinking about why it is you want to go to law school is really important, because at some point you're going to need to draft a personal statement that's just about 2 pages that shows the law schools that you're applying to why you are a good fit for their program and why you are wanting to practice law. So I think one of the very first things that you can do, even before you sit with an application or start to research schools, is really thinking about, well, why does the legal field interest me? Not everyone that goes to law school necessarily is in a courtroom practicing. You'd be surprised at your institutions of higher education. There's people, for example, in administrative capacities, or even your president's cabinet, for example, that have Juris Doctorates that advise the president, or they may make sure that they're doing compliance work for an organization. So they're keeping up with federal law or state laws. So the other thing to realize too is that a law degree can open up many possibilities for you in terms of a career. It doesn't necessarily just mean litigation. It can mean a host of things. A few other things, and before I turn it over, that are important to think about is location. Where is it that you are thinking about going to law school? Are you thinking about leaving the state that you're in? Are you thinking about staying in the state that you're in? Another thing too, obviously, that's very important is cost. And this is where, even though law schools are, of course, looking to add to the diversity of their student body, they are looking for interesting fits that would, in terms of your background, your story, maybe personal experiences. When it comes to really getting that, merit-based kind of funding, your GPA and your LSAT score are really important. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Another thing too you need to think about is the time commitment. As we have 2 individuals that are with us tonight, Nicole and Jen, who are currently in law school, and Pedro just finished, and they'll be really able to tell you about the time commitment that it takes, the resources, what keeps them passionate and driving themselves through to complete their Juris Doctorate. So those are just some elementary things that you should start thinking about when you are pursuing a law degree. And I thought that at this point, we would turn it over maybe first to Nicole to maybe comment on how she started the process of applying to law school and some of the key things that you think a student listening tonight should be aware of. Are we back to me? If so, I think, Nicole, we might have been muted, Nicole. So we're going to go back to Nicole, but you might want to unmute, Nicole. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me. I look forward to giving you guys some advice about the law school process. One of the most important things I think about the application process is putting together a checklist of everything that you need to do to apply to law school. One area that I think is oftentimes overlooked is choosing a law school and which law school you want to apply to and which group of law schools. I spent a lot of time researching different law schools and looking into the various programs that I think would be of interest to me. If I wanted to go and do business law, environmental law, criminal law, which law school garners a program that is specific to that area of law was one of my main focuses when choosing law schools to apply to. Once I lowered that list, then I looked into their LSAT requirements, their GPA requirements, and then I went from there studying for the LSAT, kind of choosing what kind of program, if I want to self-study versus if I want to go and do a course that offers LSAT help. I think one of the main focuses for students applying to law school right now should be, as Dr. Kraybill previously mentioned, location. Do you want to stay in California, or are you in another state that you would like to stay in? Where do you see yourself practicing? and then looking at whether you want to partake in a school that is just your state's accredited or if it's nationwide accredited. And those are a couple of the components I looked into when I was applying to law school. I also looked into like the clinic and externship programs that different law schools offer as well, which I think is probably something we could get into a bit later. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I appreciate that. I think that, and I know you to be a very organized person, so I think that the checklist is very important because you could be applying to different schools. So that being said, what were some of the common things that, say you applied to 5 schools or say you applied to 10 schools, what were some of the common items that each school got, and how did you organize sending that material to them? So maybe you could tell them the items that would consist of their application and how that all gets done through something like the credential assembling service and things of that nature.
So first I went onto the LSAC website where you can funnel through like your transcripts and everything that's offered for various law schools. One common thread I definitely saw was the transcript requirement, personal statement, and the LSAT, the law school admissions test. A couple of the law schools I applied to wanted an extra like diversity statement or addendum statements if you have a discrepancy in your GPA or something that you want to explain to kind of tack onto your application to give this holistic view of who you are as an applicant. One thing that I would definitely recommend is when you lower that list down of which law schools you want to apply to, making sure that you're looking at the specific requirements for personal statements. I applied to around 7 to 8 law schools, but the personal statement requirements were different for a few of those law schools. Some have page requirements that are different, word counts, or some specifically ask you a question, whereas other leave it kind of open-ended for you to just respond as to who you are as an applicant.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to come back to you, but I think we are going to move to Jen and ask Jen a bit about questions when it comes to preparing for, and if Nicole's able to stay on, maybe we could do this and then we'll get Pedro on here in just a second. Great, Pedro too, excellent. It's a party. Maybe we could have a discussion too of, the big question that a lot of students come to me is LSAT. When should I think about taking it? How should I prepare for it? And, so maybe you can demystify the process of the LSAT. And now that you have hindsight, what would you tell someone that was thinking about preparing for the LSAT?
Is that a question for me?
Yep, for Jen, and then maybe we can get Pedro to jump in, and if Nicole wants to. I'm not sure, real quick, Nicole, I'm not sure if you told them where you're currently at law school.
Oh, no, I'm currently at UC Hastings College of the Law up in the Bay Area.
And this is your second year?
Third year.
3 year. Geez, my goodness, time is flying by. So she'll be taking the bar before you know it. That means it's Jen's third year too. Do you want to say where you're at, Jen?
Yeah, so my name is Jen Fair. I am in my 3rd year as well, which is your final year of law school. I'm at USF, University of San Francisco School of Law, not too far from Nicole. So kind of cool that we did this together without that intention. So for the LSAT, it definitely was a struggle for me. I am not one who handles traditional tests like that very well. So definitely building your community around that and having friends you could talk to is helpful. I think to demystify the LSAT is to know that sometimes you're going to need to carve in a section of time to study. So I wouldn't suggest so one failure of mine in hindsight was I was taking the maximum amount of units, and I decided why not add studying the LSAT to that. That was not a good idea. So I would say definitely you're going to have to either be in school part-time or just make sure you have enough time carved out, and make sure you actually know that you're going to have to put hanging out with your friends aside, even though that's not really a thing right now. And then the cool thing about the LSAT now is the LSAT website actually has access to study materials. Unfortunately, there is a correlation between having access to study materials or a private course and your score. I don't like that at all. I have my own strong opinion on that, but whatever. So if you can find a way to get access to some of the top ones, which are, I believe, I have forgotten, but I know Barbary, maybe.
For LSAC, I think it's test masters and Kaplan. There might be more.
Kaplan, test master, Princeton review, but usually, and a lot of people do Blueprint.
Yes, I did Blueprint. So, so looking at those and seeing if you could afford those, I would highly recommend that. But you can study on your own and look at those LSAC resources, because those weren't around when I was in school. And
I was just going to say really quick, Jen, another thing too for them to think about is before they even start LSAT prep, and I don't think this was established when you guys were applying to law school, nor when Pedro was applying to law school. What I would recommend that a student first do is go through the Khan Academy, because it's free.
Yeah, that's new.
That's new. Yeah, it's new and it's free LSAT prep. But before you even do it, you could go on and do a diagnostic, and they'll kind of show you maybe you're lower on analytical reasoning or logical reasoning or something of that nature. That'll just at least tell you, okay, cold, this is where I'm at. And then you can start gauging what prep you think would be best for you. I don't know about you all, but my understanding is doing the prep, if you can do it in person or like this, where it's on a platform virtually, but you at least get some sessions with a live instructor, usually that's kind of your best bet.
I 100% agree with that. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Also, I did take the LSAT test twice. So hey, if you don't do well the first time, take it again. And regardless of your score, you're still an amazing human. So don't let that ever beat you down.
Very true. Very true. Pedro, maybe you could speak to, so we know you, just to kind of keep us in order, Nicole says, make sure you have a checklist, really think about where you want to go, research the clinics, the professors, if it's, state accredited or if it's ABA is going to allow you to practice, in different states. If it's state bar accredited, you're going to be more regionalized, and it'll kind of just probably depend on what you want to do. Jen has given us some insight into some things to think about for LSAT prep. Something that's also difficult, we kind of talked about this at first, is how do you write a personal statement? And then maybe also, how did you look for letter writers?
For me, I'll take them one at a time. So as for the personal statement, that was a little bit easier for me because I had a story, and like with the kind of law I wanted to do. It came from, I did study abroad in Israel, and I thought about doing international law, possibly criminal. Or international criminal. And I was able to do a little bit more of that in law school. And I'm not sure if that's where my career will go for doing that. Like I did the International Criminal Court at The Hague for a summer. So that was amazing. And that kind of like went in with my undergrad, and that did it. The biggest thing I can tell you to do is create a story about yourself, purpose, why you want to go to law school. And be honest, you don't need to, one of my roommates he wanted to be a corporate lawyer, not because he had any excitement about corporate law and business acquisitions, but because he had grown up poor and wanted to make money. You don't have to put it exactly in those words, but you can say, hey, this is something I know, it's a lucrative career. It's something I'm interested in. It's something I'm good at, and be honest with it. As for letter writing, that's also going to be kind of dependent on yourself, your major, your classes. I was a double major, so I had twice the number of professors to pull from. So I was able to ask my philosophy professors for letters, or my political science professors. Dr. Kraybill is actually one of my letter writers for law school. So I'm definitely plugging her as a great letter writer to help out. But just have a professor, have options for yourself personally. So you can ask 4 professors, but you might only be able to submit 2 letters. And I think Nicole talked about this earlier when going through your checklist of law schools, is that some law schools will say, we can accept 4 letters of recommendation, or we only accept 2 letters of recommendation. So at that point, you've kind of got to take a bet or a guess as like, hey, this professor is going to be writing me the best letter that's ever existed. This 3rd, 4th professor would write me a great letter, but not as good as this other one. And you kind of have to decide which ones, or it might also depend on what law school you're going to. If there's a law school that has a really good clinic you want to apply for, and you've worked in like immigration law, for instance, maybe your professor that handles the immigration clinic or the immigration classes that you've taken in undergrad or something to that effect would be a better letter writer for that program, for that law school, as opposed to your economics professor, even though they would write how amazing you are. So it's very dependent on your circumstances, but just keep that in mind as you're submitting and asking your professors or employers for letters.
Thank you. I think that that's really helpful and helps people kind of, decide who it is that they should be asking for letters. Another thing that I wanted to ask you, and I know it's a little hard right now because we're in a virtual environment, in terms of the schools that you were looking at, did you visit any, call any? How did you go about kind of vetting the schools?
So for myself, I was very fortunate. I knew I wanted to stay in California. I wanted to practice in California. I only applied to one law school out of the state of California, and that was Gonzaga. And even that was only because they were Catholic. I'm Catholic. That was kind of important to me to go to a Catholic university, or Jesuit specifically. So I kind of stayed within that focus and that religious tradition for legal education. So I get. Just remind me, Dr. Kraybill, I'm sorry. The question was just about like what exactly.
No, just kind of if when you're searching, were you able to
to visit,
call, take a tour, visit, and did that help at all?
It did. I was able to visit most of the law schools. I took my sister's Toyota Corolla all up and down California, down to San Diego, up to San Francisco. And it's obviously going to be more difficult now with COVID. I think at least some law schools, I know Santa Clara has started doing virtual tours. I was actually a tour guide at my law school for incoming students, so I was able to just go to the building. I think they're doing those virtually now. They just kind of have an interactive thing. So it's a little bit more difficult now. What I would suggest, if you wanted to now, if you're in the area, if you're willing to, you might be able to drive around the area, see, is this somewhere I want to live? Is this somewhere I want to drive to school? Is this somewhere I want to walk to school, where I want to live for at least 3 years, possibly 4 if you do a part-time program? I'm sure some law schools have come up with different approaches as to how to do that, but it was helpful for me to see that. Speaking for Santa Clara, when I started, it was an old building. They were moving to a new building, so it was kind of a weird choice. When I went to Gonzaga, it was nice because it was a completely new building, 3 stories. The entire law school was within one building. Nicole, I'm sure, could tell you about Hastings. It's 2 buildings. I'm not sure about Jen's law school. I've actually never visited, but take those things into account. Do you want to stay in one building? Are you prepared to be on a law school with an undergraduate campus or a law school by itself? I know Los Angeles has a lot, at least in Los Angeles, California, there are a lot of law schools that are standalone, like Southwestern, whereas others are attached to a undergrad campus. And there's pluses and minuses to both. You get the benefits of having, extra facilities like gyms and being able to go to sports games, but are you okay with sharing your library with undergrad students that might not be as quiet as you would like them to be? So it's kind of a give and take on that. So being able to visit and see what the environment's like on a day-to-day is something that's worthwhile. But I'm sure the law schools have done something to get you accommodated to that right now.
Thank you, Pedro. I also want to say, I think that that's important in terms of location, because sometimes that, I know the 3 of you are a little different than what I'm going to say, but on one side, location is important because that's where you can start building your network in terms of where you might actually end up practicing and getting to know that local bar association. We're fortunate that some of you have returned back to Kern County in the summer and are thinking, Pedro, you're working at the district attorney's office, and some of our other alumni are thinking about returning back to Kern County. Some, go away, which is fine too. But I think that that's important too for people who will be watching this video to take into account, is where you go is also where you're building your network for where you may be employed in the future. So that is something to think about in terms of location as well. I was going to say, before we kind of hop off kind of the application and the LSAT portion of this, and then kind of transition into like, Nicole, what are you doing to not just finish the JD, but build your resume while you're in law school to kind of maximize your professional opportunities. Same with you, Jen. And then Pedro, you're there, so you'll be able to tell us what you're doing, how you got there. Is there a final thought that you think that anyone that will be watching, this recording should be thinking in terms of the application process before we transition into, okay, now we're in law school, now we're out of law school?
Nothing on my end.
I think there's one thing I wouldn't mind adding is, when you're thinking of visiting schools, especially in the virtual environment, don't be afraid to maybe reach out to admissions and see if you could sit in on a class via Zoom. It might be even easier for you if you're applying out of state to still have that opportunity because we're in a virtual environment.
That's a very good, very, very good comment. Thank you. Anything, Jen?
Yeah, that was amazing. I wanted to answer the questions as usual. So how long, there's some questions, 2 questions. How long did I study for the LSAT? I don't know exactly. I spent 3 months and I was interning and part-time and just studying. I think it was 2 to 3 months and it was just night classes. I could be wrong on that though. And then somebody had the question, what do you mean by access to study materials? So that would be those private courses that you would pay for, or reach out to your professors and see what they have. And then Khan, which is free. I highly recommend if you could do the free one to try it out to see what it does for you, because that was not an option. My final thought is when you're applying, really think of what is indicative to you and what you want. Don't go for a school that doesn't match who you are. Unless you're really looking for a change in your lifestyle, and go to a school that's going to accept you. Law school can be tough at times, most of the time, but it's great. And you really want to be able to have access to community. So go somewhere that's indicative to you. Some people thrive by being away from from their family. I am one of them, just because I'm away and I could just focus on school. However, some people really need to be closer to home. So think about those factors as well. I think those are my final thoughts.
Thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate that. Now I thought it might be a good idea to transition to, okay, obviously the 3 of you got accepted to law school and are doing well. And now perhaps what we can do is start with Nicole, maybe giving some examples of what you're doing to build your professional resume so that you're marketable after you take the bar, or and then same with you, Jen. And then Pedro, maybe you could kind of give them a sense of how you landed a job so soon after law school and why you were studying and taking the bar.
I think there's 2 different ways I've kind of enhanced my resume. First is within the law school, partaking in an externship opportunity or being active in clubs and organizations. I have an interest in education or business law. So I'm a member of the Business Law Society. I'm on an academic journal, the Business Law Journal. And then I've also had the opportunity and privilege of being able to partake in externships. So an externship is kind of like an internship, but you get course credit for it and you take it during the semester. I've had the privilege of partaking in 2 of them. One was an educational law opportunity at a school district, and the other one I'm currently actively doing with the Atticus Project, which is like a startup kind of combining artificial intelligence and the law. And then the second way that I have enhanced my professional resume is through those summer internships. During my first year of law school, I wanted to explore different fields of law, and I highly recommend everyone do that, whether you know going into law school or not what you want to do. Using that first year law school summer internship to kind of experience a different field of law that you have an interest in. I was able to intern at the California Public Utilities Commission. So I was kind of looking at a bit of environmental law, a bit of government law. And then this last summer, I had an opportunity lined up and then COVID hit. So I came back to Bakersfield for the summer and I was given the amazing opportunity of interning with the Kern Community College District, another school district, another education law opportunity. I highly recommend that when you're being active in clubs or organizations on campus or being involved in opportunities like that, you maintain the connection, maintain connections with your professors, send updates even when you're not active in an opportunity, just so you're prolonging those professional relationships.
Excellent advice, Nicole. Thank you so much. Jen, did you want to add anything in regards to your personal experience on how you've also been working on your personal resume? And I would like to say to the audience, another thing, because some of you, I'm assuming, are undergrads, Nicole, Jen, and Pedro were also very good at this as undergrads, working on their professional resume as they were working on degree completion for their bachelor's degree. So for them, I think it was just continued momentum, but kind of trying to learn that skill early with getting involved in clubs, trying to get internships. It'll give you those necessary skills to then when you're in law school, be competitive. So I think that that's something to think about too. These three were doing that also in their baccalaureate careers. So Jen, did you want to add to that? And then Pedro, we'll get to you and you kind of give us a nice picture of how you've gotten to where you are, because it's exciting when you finish law school, take the bar, and have a job. Jen, go for it.
Yeah, so Nicole's advice is exactly on point. The only things I would add, I think, would be building a community. So wherever you're at, whether that's with volunteer work, join a bar association once you're in law school. You'll get that information when you're there. And if not, you can connect to a professor or an administrative person that can help you. Definitely think about the internships that you're going to take. I interned, ironically, with Pedro at the district attorney's office. Great opportunity. However, now I want to be in the public defense spectrum. It's a hard leap to go from the DA world to the public defense world. I was able to do it, but yeah. So also definitely one thing I look back and kind of regret is I did a study abroad program for my first year as an internship. That was a great personal opportunity, but I don't know that that was the best professional opportunity. So think about, just be methodical about the internships that you take would be my advice. Finally, definitely take advantage of any clinics that your school offers and connect with professors any way you can.
Thank you so much, Jen. Okay, Pedro, did you want to add to any of the things that Nicole and Jen said that perhaps set you up for your position at the public defender's office, and maybe also what the audience should, and then we can get back to the chat because there's some really good questions. Maybe, what you should be thinking, as you're exiting law school and preparing for the bar.
Great. First, I will say that I'm at the DA's office right now. I know Jen was at the DA's then PD. I'm still at the DA's office right now here in Kern County. I would say there's a couple things, everything that they already said, so I can just emphasize what they said about doing a lot as much as you can. The big things that I would suggest you do is, one of the questions they did ask us in the chat that about if you want to intern before or during law school. If possible, I would say both. It is difficult, and this does kind of segue into the part-time question a little bit as well, but it's a little bit of both. If I interned at the DA's office prior to law school for about 6 months, and then after I began law school, I came back and was able to be here as a law clerk. I was able to be at this office. I was able to be at one DA's office in the Bay Area, at the Contra Costa DA's office, where I was a law clerk, and you're actually able to appear in court, as well as, like they said, if you can do moot court, if you can do trial team, or if you want to do a journal in law school, there are a ton of opportunities, again, depending on where you go to law school, to do these sorts of things. So if there's an area of practice that you're not so sure about, but you want to get a feel for it, do that. Unlike Jen, I did do study abroad as well. I found it informative and really helpful. And that is a possible career path to do later on in my career. So that's something that is possible for some people, not for others. But it doesn't have to be a DA's office. It could be any legal job that you can do. The thing that I always did, that I'm infamous for in my friend group in law school, was I cold called or cold emailed constantly for job opportunities, because I didn't want to assume that this job offer was going to be necessarily available to me when I came back home to my home county. So I would email county council in different counties. I would email different DA's offices. I would email different public interest or public civil rights groups about job opportunities. 9 times out of 10, I will tell you, they will not respond to you. But that one time in 10, like, hey, I don't know, we don't really do a program like that, but we're willing to take you on as an intern, and there's your foot in the door. And you should obviously only email or call places that you're interested in working. Don't just call places that exist. I have friends that's literally how they got their job at Twitter, that they added somebody in Twitter, and then they got their legal internship. They obviously went through the formal application process later, but it started with just sending someone a message on Twitter. As for the part-time question, I'm sorry, I guess back to Kraybill's question, doing all that prep is kind of how you get your job. Most jobs in law school, post-law school, you will get that offer during law school. That's not all, but I know a lot of my colleagues did get their job offers sometime during their 3L year, some even as early as the end of their 2L summer. That's not necessarily the case for everybody. Sometimes you don't want to accept that offer. But what you can do is just try and get your feet wet in as many different areas of law as you can as possible, and try to just tell them, like, hey, I'm interested in coming here as a post bar. Some offices have programs, some law firms have programs already directly set up for that, and you can apply to them directly. Others, you might have to be a little bit more assertive and say, hey, I want to work here after law school. What do I have to do that? And then fulfill those steps. As for bar prep, I have a million and one things to say. That can be a different panel on that. The COVID-19 situation definitely muddled up that thing. It was kind of delayed. It was online monitors, all that stuff. We get results in January, I think, as of this point. The one thing I will tell you, if you're still in undergrad and waiting to go to law school, I would suggest is becoming a rep for a bar prep company, because that will save you thousands of dollars. I tell that to everyone. I told that to everybody at my tours. Even if you don't go to Santa Clara Law, if you go to another law school, find your Barbary rep, find your Kaplan rep, your Themis. If you're on the East Coast, there's some other companies that are East Coast specific, but those are the big national ones. Those programs can cost anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000. And when you're already paying $50,000 a year or more for law school education, that money adds up. So that's, I think, all I can say for that. So I think I'll give it back to Dr. Kraybill.
Thank you so much, Pedro and Nicole and Jen. A couple of things I just wanted to address in the chat that I'll address, and then I'll turn some of the questions over to you. Jen Lee, you're right. If you go to a full-time program, that first year they don't want you to work, but then in the summer, though, by the spring and whatnot, you're going to want to be looking for an internship. So that shouldn't preclude you, from trying to look at opportunities for you to still develop your professional resume. And then there was one from George. I'm not sure if we addressed it. Would you recommend us starting to intern at firms once we're in law school? I think that we did address that. There's two other questions, another one from Jen and then one from Charlie. Jen, this question from Jen is for Jen. And it's, could you clarify why it would be difficult to switch from prosecution to public defense? Wouldn't it still be beneficial to have experience from the other side?
So Jen, you ask amazing questions. I wanted to add one point to the full-time versus part-time. If you have to go to school part-time for law school and that's your only option, or it's not going to happen, then part-time would obviously be an option. I would advise full-time if you can, just because you can fully immerse yourself in it. That helps with community building, and that helps with just getting through. I've also had friends that took part-time for academic reasons. They had certain disabilities where it was better for them to take part-time. So those are things to think about. So I love your question. I 100% agree with you. It is beneficial to have experience from other sides. So from a personal standpoint, I still stand behind the fact that I interned at both. I think you can get away with it, but at every interview, I just have to make a really strong, bold case as to why I jumped from one, which is from one side, your goal is to prosecute this person for a crime they're accused of. The other is you're trying to defend that person. So they're just two totally different realms. I think that it shouldn't be as adversarial as it is. So I think, hey, if you can get away with doing both, just have those strong interpersonal skills and be prepared for those hard, tough questions in interviews, and know, it could affect whether you get accepted or not. So hope that answers your question.
Can I add something to that, Jen? I think it's difficult to transition from one side of criminal law to the other, regardless of whether you're going public defender to DA or just turning to PD. I think it's not impossible. It's generally because whenever you're interviewing for a new position, and Jen, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't done it. I've stayed on the DA side this entire time. But the DA's job is prosecute crimes, seek justice for victims, and a public defender's job is to represent one particular client. The DA's client is the state, and for some people, they have a little bit of suspicions if you're coming from one side to the other. That, like, hey, are you just like my law school friends used to joke that I was an undercover public defender because whenever we'd had mock trial, I would poke holes in my own case, but I thought it was to make sure to strengthen my own case, not to say it was a bad case. But employers might look at that with a little bit of suspicion, like, what, did you not like it? The few classmates I had that did go from DA to PD, I don't have any that went PD to DA, but they just said, I did it for a summer or I did it for a year, didn't like it, I want to do this. Or they saw something that they didn't like and they want to do this. So that's something that you'd have to basically use your own skills in interviewing to kind of answer that question for employers.
Thank you so much, Pedro. We have another question in the chat, and I think I'll give it back to Nicole, and it also kind of fits what she stated. Nicole, this has a couple of parts to the question, and it's, what did you mean by updates in regards to maintaining professional relationships, and what is included in professional relationships?
Okay, great question. I think first I'll start off with what is included in a professional relationship. When I say professional relationship, I mean like the relationship you'll have with a professor that you got along with really well, or a past superior in an internship or an externship opportunity. When I talked about maintaining that professional relationship, it could be as easy as sending out an email, updating them on a new opportunity you've had, or thanking them again for what you learned and how it has applied to something you just partook in. It could be something as simple as, I loved your externship opportunity so much, and it actually propelled me forward to engage in this new internship that I never thought I would. Just something to kind of maintain a relationship with them. So when you have a reference that you need when you're applying for a job, you can like go back into that bank of people who are there to support you. And it's not like, oh, I met you once and I don't even remember the work that you even like completed for me. Just something to maintain that relationship with a past superior or a professor.
Thank you, Nicole. I think, to be honest, Nicole and Jen and Pedro are good examples of that. In terms of, I know that they keep in touch with their professors. They even when they were in law school, they would update me and email me. And I think kind of what Nicole is getting at, that way too, when you engage them, you have a relationship, you kind of know where to pick back up on, and they have a vested interest in you succeeding, and they are excited for you, and they want to learn more from you. And so I can't agree more that I think developing and cultivating those professional relationships, it also, just to be honest, we're humans, and it enriches our experiences as professionals and friends and colleagues. And so I think it'll make your work practicing, there goes my puppy, sorry, it'll make your work practicing law even more meaningful. So thank you all.
Dr. Kraybill, I will add, that's also how I actually got my job coming back to this county. I was able to just text my former supervisor, hey, who's the new person in charge of clerkships? I'd like to come back after the bar exam. It's also just a lifeline for your jobs. So that's something to keep in mind as well, that, if you did like working at a certain place, you want to come back, you want to keep in contact with people to be able to reach back out later and possibly work there again at another summer clerkship during the semester or post-bar.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was wondering if, before we conclude, if there were any additional questions in the chat, and then if not, if you had any just kind of final thoughts or advice for them as they start considering law school.
Anybody want to? I can go first. Just to, if you're, I think there's someone in the chat. Oh, I think that's a question for you, Dr. Kraybill. As for last minute advice, I think if you're in college right now, you're in a good spot to be for getting to law school. I honestly, I feel really bad for my colleagues that are still in law school, Jen and Nicole. My last semester in law school was during COVID. So I had my last 2.5 months over Zoom, and I personally hated it. Especially since it was kind of like, I didn't expect it. I didn't see it coming. I think now it's a little bit, people are getting used to it a little bit. So if you're in college right now and you're doing the whole Zoom thing, try to do as much as you can. I think there is an opening of opportunity now, whereas before, you might not have the opportunity to do a certain job or a certain clerkship because it was in a different city than you. Whereas now I think trying to look at the positives amongst all the negatives, you might be able to do remote work for an organization or a school district or an office, depending on the kind of law that you might want to practice or the kind of work you want to do. So I would try to just be resilient. That's the best thing you can do. That is a skill that is and a trait that is going to help you throughout law school, because as I'm sure my colleagues Jen and Nicole will tell you, that law school is a grind. The first year is there kind of just to like beat you up, spit you back out, and then you kind of just build your way back up. You're learning how to be a lawyer, and that is a difficult process. I'm not sure the percentages, but there are a large amount of students that don't finish law school. I think my law school was like 10% of my incoming class did not graduate. It might be different at other law schools, but that's something to keep aware of. And especially in the midst of everything going on right now, resilience is something that's important, especially if you want to finish a legal education and eventually work in public service or any job. But public service specifically, it's you got to want to do it and just be resilient as best you can.
Thank you, Pedro. That's great advice. To answer the question from Jen, if we have completed a graduate degree already, how does that factor in terms of GPA or just in total consideration of your application? A couple of things. Sometimes your application might ask you for an undergrad and graduate GPA. There are a lot of people who go to law school that already have a master's degree or an advanced, sometimes even a terminal degree. So that, that you're not, alone in that. It won't factor, it'll be treated separate, to be honest with you. It won't be looked at in terms of, because they're in some ways completely different. But it's one thing I do want to say is, when you are applying to law school, you need to give them every transcript from every institution of higher learning you have ever been to. And I just know this from working with students and then personal experience, that if you submit your application for law school and they see on a transcript that you even took one class at another university, even just one class, maybe in a winter session, they're going to want that. And so that's one thing to think about, is to make sure that you're pulling your transcripts from every institution. Now, in terms of whether it'll help you or not, it certainly won't hurt. It does show them that you know how to start and finish another degree program, that you can advance beyond your baccalaureate education. And so in some ways it's helpful. I've had some people that have done that route first and it's worked out well. And then I've had others that say, I wish I just would have went the JD route. I didn't end up really needing that for my career. So it's just all kind of dependent on the individual. But it certainly won't hurt you in any way, shape, or form. Like I said, law schools, to be quite frank with you, are very used to getting applications of people that have a graduate degree. That's not rare for them whatsoever. So the very, very good question. So I know that Pedro had a final thought and gave it to us, and I think your comments about grit and resiliency are vital. And so just to wrap up, Nicole, did you have maybe any nuggets of inspiration for aspiring law students? And then we'll go to Jen.
Definitely. I think I have two pieces of advice, one with relation to the application and one to law school more generally. With regard to the application, I think I would advise anyone applying to law school to not be afraid to ask for help. I'm doing some pro bono work helping current students who are interested in law school apply to law school. And I think the amount of help you gain from just finding other people who are going through it with you is something that is extremely valuable. When I was applying, I had Jen applying at the same time, and just being able to like go back and forth and talk about like, my gosh, the LSAT is terrible, or my gosh, I'm like having to put together these applications. It was very stress relieving, and it made the process a lot more fun. With regard to law school more generally, I think I would echo what Pedro had to say. The first year is going to be tough, but you can get through it. I would really recommend that during your first year and beyond, to not necessarily pay attention to all of the noise around you. Everyone learns in a different way. Everyone learns the law differently, and the study habits that have worked for you in the past could work for you in law school, or you may have to change it. But whoever's sitting next to you or virtually in your Zoom room, the way they may learn, the way they may outline, how early they may outline for the final exam could be different. And caring about how your fellow law students are doing in a competitive environment doesn't help you going forward, and to just focus on the habits that work for you is something it's very valuable in law school.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Jen, did you want to leave us with any final words for our audience to think about?
Yeah, it was cool to have Nicole, and I still have her to just kind of bounce ideas from time to time. So finding a friend that is going to go along with you. Also, final nuggets. So if you're applying, work really hard for that LSAT score and that GPA. If you don't have that high LSAT score that you were hoping for, and you don't have the highest GPA that you were looking forward to, still apply. Don't let that be a deterrent. Still apply. Thinking of your first year, so I love Bob Ross's quote, "We don't make mistakes, just happy little accidents." You're applying to law school, and your first year is basically it's gonna definitely put your ego in check. You're gonna think you're at the top of the world, and then you're gonna get those first grades, and you're gonna be like, "Oh, that did not go well." That's pretty much a majority of people. So remember that you're not your LSAT score and you're not your GPA. Just work your hardest and constantly check yourself and ask yourself, am I working as hard as I can? And reach out for a mentor. I highly, highly advise that. I reached out to Dr. Kraybill. It was terrible. I was so scared. She probably doesn't even know how scared I was. But I know I needed help. I'm a first year, I'm a first generation. I didn't know what I was doing. So definitely reach out to those who really do want to help push you to your next level. And remember that once you get into law school, remember you got into law school, and that in itself is a success. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate it.
Well, let me come on here to say thank you to the panel for an amazing hour. I think we could go on for another hour, but I'm going to release everyone to the next Zoom call they all have. To our panelists, to Jen, to Nicole, to Pedro, thank you so much. Dr. Kraybill, as always, a tremendous set of insight, and kudos to you for mentoring, 3 outstanding, young former students who are clearly on their way to make an impact in this world, in the field of law. So for Pi Sigma Alpha, we'll bow out. Professor Kraybill, any final remarks on your part?
No, I think that Nicole and Jen and Pedro said it all, and I think they're just telling you that to really believe in yourself, that you got this, and to reach out for help. And no one really does anything on their own, and everyone is, even the law school admissions personnel, are usually always very happy to help applicants. And also too, if I'm happy that you can email me at jkraybill@csub.edu. I'll put it in the chat real quick. I'm happy that we can even have a Zoom, and I'm happy to walk you through the application process and be a mentor to you if you need any help. Thank you. And again, Nicole and Pedro, infinitely proud of you, and thank you for everything, as Miles is growling.
All right, well, Miles, for
thank you, Dr. Kraybill.
all this as well. It's not a Zoom without an animal popping in. I love it. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Pi Sigma Alpha Centennial Series. We'll be back online on Thursday night.
Bye, guys.